This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, seldom can a week's worth of news be encapsulated by just one name, but locally that was the case. While the rest of the nation was talking about a debate in Philadelphia, we were looking at a tropical system in the Gulf to be called Francine. We will examine the tempest from the tropics, including the hardest hit areas, how local governments responded, plus news media coverage and heated complaints about energy outages and flooding. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Mike Smith, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, and LeBron Joseph, anchor and reporter, WGNO TV, Channel 26. And we're going to go on over to Mike right now, and let's talk about Francine. Just what to say about Francine? Nobody really was welcoming her here, that's for sure. So she turned out to be one that gave us pretty much of a punch, and one that we weren't really sure was indeed going to come over us, but did.
Yeah, it was an unusual storm in a lot of ways. It kept wobbling one way and the other, and different predictions about where it was going to go. It stayed within the cone in a way, but jogged a little further to the east than we thought it was going to go, and a little bit more of a risk to the city and its suburbs than we initially thought. Exposed some drainage issues, but in the city we often think about, but maybe not so much in Jefferson Parish, where a lot of homes flooded, dozens of homes flooded, especially in Kenner. I think they had some pump issues there, but the Jefferson Parish officials say this was more of just being overwhelmed, which poses the question of if a storm that size overwhelmed us, kind of what's in the future.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about the flooding and the drainage issues. Taking a look at Francine, where ultimately the storm did go, and what it turned out to be in terms of the category scale. What were the first, the worst hit areas, and also how strong was this storm?
So yeah, it ultimately became a Category 2 with about 100 miles per hour sustained winds. It came ashore kind of near Morgan City. It sort of kept shifting a little left, a little right. And then it looked like it was going to stay a Category 1, but at the last minute strengthened again. So it came ashore kind of Atchafalaya River area around that region. Sort of hit Terrebonne and Lafourche, although wasn't nearly an Ida-like situation. Then sort of swept up a little bit and kind of veered a little bit and hit the river parishes in New Orleans area a little bit and kind of spared Baton Rouge in that way. A lot more rain than we would have expected, I think, because of the way it sort of broke up.
Did you say something?
No.
Okay, Ida, you talked about Ida, and seeing that it was going to go over, Lafourche and Terrebonne again, all you could think of was like, oh my goodness, these people have not even really recovered from Ida. But, this storm was just not as strong as Ida.
Yeah, it wasn't, the winds weren't nearly as strong. I mean, you think about Ida, you just think about going back to 2020, what we've had to deal with. We had Laura in 2020, which was in southwest Louisiana, and just tore up the Lake Charles area, which didn't get as much attention here. Then Ida, which really hit the bayou areas really, really hard. And then also parts of the New Orleans area as well, which we kind of put that on the back burner and because just so much going on. But I think a lot of people were still rebuilding from Ida and had flooded in Ida. And we've talked to some people who were about to raise their houses and flooded again.
There was some fear in the river parishes from the St. John folks that the surge from Lake Pontchartrain and Maurepas with that levee not being completed. In fact, it just started, a brand new levee, and it affecting them in the same way that Ida had, but they were pretty much spared that. That certainly didn't happen. There's a couple subdivisions that flooded out that way as well, but they certainly didn't have the issues of flooding from the storm surge.
Well, the biggest bullseye is always Grand Isle. How did it do?
Grand Isle fared relatively well this time. They benefited from the path. So what we heard from there was they had a little bit of flooding, but it wasn't anything like Ida just obliterated Grand Isle, you know. So they're relatively okay. Same with some of the other lower areas of Jefferson Parish. Lafitte, for example, I think they did okay. So yeah, it was more kind of as a storm swept inland that it posed some problems.
Also, I mean, this storm moved fast, which Ida didn't. I mean, Ida just seemed like it was never going to leave with those horrible winds. But this storm did sort of move at a faster clip.
Yeah, I think when it got close to land, I think it was moving as fast as 17 miles an hour, which is pretty fast for a hurricane. And, you know, you talk to a lot of the experts and they say that when they were looking at that, that gave them a little bit of relief, because you just don't want something like that sitting over the city and just dumping rain and rain and rain. That's a big risk for us, because even though we have these big, expensive new levees, that's not for rainfall. That's for storm surge. So, yeah.
And we sort of got a taste of that with this storm, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit more. So, you know, with the fact that it was moving fast, you know, even over in the open water, faster as it approached land. When it's over the water, this is where it really intensifies. So, because it was moving at a faster clip, it didn't intensify that much. But also, there were some other weather factors that impacted this storm.
Yeah, there was a lot of kind of competing factors with this one that made it a little bit hard to get a gauge on. There were warm waters in the Gulf, which usually strengthens a storm, but you also had dry air from Texas that was competing with that. And then you had, as it got closer to the coast, you had wind shear that cuts into the storm and also weakens it. So all those different things going on at the same time. And you saw that in the forecast, which fluctuated a little bit. They weren't, I think part of the situation is we have a lot more information now, and we see minute by minute what's happening. In the old days, we didn't get that close up of a view, and we didn't say, "Oh, you got it wrong," and that sort of thing. But so you had some of that. But it was a complicated storm.
But is all of that information good for us? So sometimes I think that the overload of information can be stressful.
You can sit there and fret about it.
Yeah, and there's some misinformation. You know, my poor wife has texted me back, and you know, it's jog to the right. And I'm like, listen, meteorologist is 5 feet from me. He just, you know, wait, where'd you see that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does all the rain mean that there's less likely to be a saltwater wedge issue later in the year? Does that not have any impact?
That's a good question. We were actually discussing today. I think the rivers are unfortunately still low. And I don't know if that was enough mixing to cause the saltwater to go away. I think we're waiting for the Corps to give us a new measurement on where the wedge is and if it's still there. I think the sense was, I talked to one of our fellow experts, Mark Schlefstein, at the paper, who said he feels like it's still going to be an issue. To what degree, let's see. But he said he didn't feel like the rain was enough and maybe not enough mixing to really solve the issue. But let's see what the Corps says.
Mike,
on that.
you mentioned rivers on the North Shore in St. Tammany. What we often hear about after these storms is the rivers cresting, the Tchefuncte and places like that. We heard that one or two of the rivers were set to crest today. I thought that was pretty quick, because usually we hear about the cresting happening 2 or 3 days after the event. Does that seem right for you?
Good question. I did see that it looked like they crested and things were relatively okay. That I don't know why it would have been so much faster than usual. Maybe it dissipated so quickly that they didn't rise as much as they usually would, you know. But yeah.
Well, something certainly for the folks on the North Shore to be on the lookout for. Okay, let's talk about, when we're talking about rivers, anyway, that's water, and we're talking about flooding right now, what happened on the South Shore, as well as, you know, the power outages, which of course always comes with a storm. So how are we power outage-wise?
Well, it's very interesting. By and large, we're probably, the response has been, I would imagine, well, certainly better than Ida, you know, but we certainly didn't lose the transmission line in the middle of the Mississippi River either. Yeah. You know, here we are 48 hours removed, or right at 48 hours removed from the storm, with about 300,000 outages initially down to about 93,000 statewide. Now, that's about 2/3 in a matter of 48 hours, which isn't so bad. And when you consider Jefferson had 66,000, they're right at about 10,000 now. Orleans had about 46,000, about 8,500 now. In the larger scope of things, it would appear as if Entergy has really done a bang-up job at least getting to this point. Now, if you are still in the heat right now,
you're not feeling that, no.
You're not feeling like they've done this great job. The worst damage would have been the Terrebonne, Lafourche, and Ascension parishes, and they've made it clear that those parishes are going to take longer because the damage is obviously heavier. The interesting thing, and I think that this is not only with the power company agencies, but certainly the water systems as well, is messaging and how we get messages to residents. And leading up to this thing, we're getting the rah-rah, and because we all talk to these folks in the media saying, hey, yeah, we're ready, and we've got trucks on standby, and we're this, and this. And the storm hits, and 40,000 folks out in Orleans, and folks are going, okay, power's out. What are we looking like? When can I? And well, we're going to take a day to assess this, and then we'll, and once we're finished with the assessment,
we don't want to hear that it's going to take a day. No.
Neither do we want to be lectured about this is why it's important to harden the grid and da-da-da-da-da. And Joe Giarrusso got his ire about, hey, hang on a second, you guys.
We don't want to hear about global warming, right?
Don't want to hear about any of that.
And we know the grid needs to be hardened.
Yes,
we
exactly.
Don't need to be taught that.
Tell us what needs to happen now.
Yeah.
Don't talk to us about resilience. Let's talk about restoration.
And like you said, and how long is it going to take? That's what people want to know. Please give us an estimate, because we want to know if we, plan to leave or clean out my freezer.
That is correct.
Cook everything in my fridge.
And so I think they kind of got the message, because by this morning we started getting some better estimates in terms of, Orleans scheduled 90% is their estimate will be, up and running by Saturday. Most of the other parts of the metro area by Monday at the latest. Pretty much everyone should have their power. And I just think that really became a frustrating thing for residents. And I think the question becomes, hey, power companies, we understand you can walk and chew gum at the same time. We get the whole, trying to figure out exactly how long this is going to take doing your assessments. But where are the bucket trucks? It's not 30-mile-an-hour winds out there anymore. What's happening?
Yeah, and let's talk too about the flooding and the drainage issue. I mean, before the storm and all of the flooding, we were hearing from Jefferson Parish and ultimately Sewage and Water Board too about conserved water because of sewer issues.
That is correct. And Mike brought this up a few minutes ago. Both Cynthia Lee Sheng, the parish president, Jefferson Parish, and Ghassan Korban alluded to the fact that because of the amount of water, both systems were pretty much overwhelmed by the amount of rain that we got. That's what they tell us. And to the effect, or so overwhelmed that the drainage, the amount of water attempting to be pumped out or whatever, is also affecting the sewage system. And Ghassan even mentioned that both systems asked to conserve water. We're used to getting the boil water advisories, so rarely do we get the, hey, don't take a shower, or try not to wash clothes for a day.
Your dishwasher,
Both of those have been rescinded. They were rescinded earlier today. But the fact remains is that, Sewage and Water Board has been under the microscope for a very, very long time. The myriad of issues there. We're beginning to hear more about the drainage and pump issues in Jefferson Parish.
And that's, of course, with Jefferson Parish, a lot of residents are certainly surprised to see water coming into their homes and their streets really flooded. Even though this is a really, really intense rainfall in a short amount of time, but the systems were overwhelmed. And also pumps were down.
Pumps down, losing pumps in a couple different places, lost some pumps in Kenner. That being said, as dark as that looks for those 12, 15 hours, both Orleans and Jefferson, by and large, were dry by the time the sun came up. With the exception, and Mike and I were having this conversation earlier as well, but if the water went in your house in Kenner and, the sheetrock's ruined or whatever, it's not much consolation.
Not at all. Yeah. And it was a really heavy rainfall in a short amount of time, but as you brought up, what if we face, God willing, we never do, but we face a storm like Harvey, which Harvey dumped how much?
It was in some areas up to 60 inches, which is way beyond anything we can handle.
We can definitely. And then in terms of Jefferson Parish too, there were I think just 2 pumps down there. but the canals were overflowing because of the heavy rain. But there was a real issue in Kenner because of pumps operated by the Aviation Board outside of the Jefferson Parish system.
Yeah.
So
That contributed, yes.
And so I guess somebody needs to take a look at that too. There were supposedly 3 out of 4 pumps down, which caused an issue for everybody.
Yeah.
But as you pointed out, the city drained. It drained quickly.
City drained fairly quickly.
City in the parish.
There was
Suburb
water
Street.
on a lot of, banks, mid-city, and some of the stuff in Lakeview and some places out in New Orleans East and uptown. Yes, there was water, and definitely high water. Certainly a couple folks have lost their cars, and, the traditional places drained. Flooded, like the underpass at Canal Boulevard and Carrollton Avenue, where we're always going to get water on a hard rain or whatever the story is. But they pretty much drained. The only other utility, if you want to call it that kind of suffered any significant stuff was Cox here in Orleans Parish, and they've been working to get that back up. Apparently, they had some pretty big outages as well.
Yeah, okay, heavy rains.
There was a picture that was shown on the TV stations. It was a group shot of all the electrical workers that had been brought in to do this.
Yeah.
It must have been 200 people, all sitting together. And I was amazed by it. I was saying somebody is responsible for getting these people, for housing them, for feeding them, and coordinating them. Whoever that person is a hero tonight, okay? That's a big job. It's a tough job.
It is a tough job. And quite frankly, we report on the utilities and try to hold them to, a standard of at least being able to turn stuff around. But it is in no way, a reflection of these guys that, as you say, Errol, that have come here, that are doing very dangerous work, by the way.
Right. Hard, and very hard work, and we thank them for every minute that they spend on it because it's so crucial and important. Okay, some other hard workers too, because it amazed me that they stayed up as long as they did. Were people in the media, going to bed, and then 6 hours later, the same folks are still on the air. Just amazing that the coverage that they did.
They were amazing, and they were. The technology was amazing. We were talking a while ago, in the early days of TV in New Orleans, there was one weather guy, a guy named Nash Roberts. Everybody remembers him. He was the first weather guy. And when there was something out in the Gulf, he had like this big grease board, and he had like a grease pen. And so he would draw like the Florida Panhandle. And he said, well, we think it's here. Tomorrow we think it's going to be there. Here's Cuba. We think it's coming this way. And then he'd kind of wipe it. And that's how that was the graphics for our weather. And most of the time, he was right. What we all waited for was, as it approached the Gulf Coast, that he'd say, it's taking a turn to the right. Yeah. We all prayed for that turn to the right. It didn't make that turn for Katrina, but we did. But that was the only thing. But anyway, you look at the coverage. The new guy who I think everybody's really depending on now, I realize myself, is Jim Cantore from the Weather Channel. Because everybody wanted to know where he was going, because he's always the first guy on the scene. And the word got out he was going to Lafayette. And so people, at least in southeast Louisiana, would think, well, at least he's going to Lafayette. I think he changed. But anyway, the visual technology, I really think the most visual thing now is all those spaghetti things that they're showing.
Spaghetti models.
Which are there's a bunch of them. I don't know who all those people are who are doing all those things. But you're looking for that line in the middle. Meanwhile, the weathercaster is saying, don't depend too much on that line in the middle.
All these different models,
Yeah, but that's the closest that we have. But what they're able to show with, different areas and measuring temperature in different ways, I think it's just amazing technology. And you must see it in the studio.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible. And even local meteorologists having conversations with the folks from the Hurricane Center and all of that. The technology is amazing. But, Errol, one piece of technology that has also colored all of this is something we all carry around, and that is our cell phone. And the response from viewers these days is beyond what we've ever had. And it's quick and it's immediate. And, if I'm in Kenner and my house is flooding, and you've got this great piece of video and you send it in, that's on television quicker than it's ever been before.
Yeah, we can find out about it within a minute, that your house is taking water. So, yeah, it is pretty amazing. But the local media did, once again, I think, a yeoman's job in keeping us informed, working hard at it.
Thank you so
and
much.
Maybe we
a lot
don't
of hard-working
need
folks.
all those shots of a reporter out in the windstorm.
Yeah.
I remember
I agree.
There was a local reporter, a very respected reporter. He was talking about having to do that. And he says, Errol, I want you to know I love my job, but I'm not willing to die for it. Okay.
Yeah.
And he'd been sent out there, with debris flying. But just what's available in terms of technology is just
It really is incredible, and we still do have those reporters standing out there in 100-mile-per-hour winds, wondering, fighting to stand
we're
up.
prevented from standing in
But
water.
they put the young ones out there who don't know better yet. Okay, the older ones, I don't know.
I know, I'm not going to try that. Okay, let's talk now a little bit about the science of storms, because we did see this one. We were just talking about, it turned out to be not certainly as strong as Ida, and it was affected by this wind shear coming from Texas, the Texas trough. Thank you, Texas. We needed you this time. Yeah. So with the science of storms, though, and we're talking about the technology too. They tell us a whole lot more, but still we don't know exactly, because with the storm, we still weren't exactly sure where it was going to go until it went there.
Yeah, it's kind of a double-edged thing. We've got all this technology where we can stay up to date, but people now expect everything to be exact all the time, and it's just not an exact science, and it never will be. These things are unpredictable in a lot of ways. You can sort of give odds and kind of predictions and a range of places that it's going to go. And that's about as good as you can get. And it did stay within that cone of uncertainty, as they call it, even though the forecasters got a little bit of criticism for, at least some of them anyway, for not predicting it would go a little further east, although I think some of our local guys did say that repeatedly.
Yes, they did indeed say, I'm not buying this, I think it's going to nudge, and they were right.
Yeah, and so I think everybody was keeping a close eye on that because obvious reasons we were all in that path. But yeah, I think that is going to, not to get into a whole discussion about climate change, but that's going to put a whole wrench into everything and cause some changes to storms, already is. Related to electricity outages too, just think we get extended electricity outages in the heart of the summer. I was reading a story today, I think by the Washington Post, that really examined that issue that happened with Errol in Texas. And you're going to have, remember in Ida, this was the cause of most deaths, was the storm outages. And, that story was making the point that this is going to happen at some point in Gulf Coast cities. And we need to be prepared for that. So it's a lot of things that are kind of making an already severe threat even worse in a lot of ways, unfortunately.
Right, and so these storms, obviously we need to plan for them because they're going to keep on coming. And climate is impacting them. With this one, we saw a lot of water, a lot of rain, and that's something we're being told. Be expecting that. You're going to see wetter storms move in on you, and powerful ones. Government response.
It's reminded me a little bit about the early days of COVID, like when those issues were coming together. COVID became a state's issue. All of a sudden, we're hearing from governors. A lot of people forget about governors. There's 50 of them out there. And it's really in their hands, all the press conferences, the policy different from place to place. It was the governor's issue. And when you have something like this, it reminds me, this is a parish. This is a county president, a parish president of the issue. And so I think if you're a parish president, you kind of live for these kind of issues because this is something where you're in charge of the police, the fire, and everything else, okay? Whereas the other days, you're working on budgets and and making reports. And so, but I always enjoy seeing them and hearing them. One, because of accents. You can tell that they're really part of their environment, which I think is encouraging. But to be able to talk about the topography of their place,
that is correct.
This bayou and this hill and all this. And sometimes I think this is government at its best. This is people from down here, who know their territory, who can talk about it, and they can talk about it with passion. And so I'm always interested in seeing that part. And they always seem to be a good job. They know where the problems are. Ever since 911, to me, it was 911 that first created the position of Homeland Security. And to me, that was a national thing. Now every county has a Homeland Security. That is correct.
Director. Everybody has their own GOSEP or their own emergency management team or something.
And so they just have their specialists. And so it's just good seeing the apparatus of it and how it works.
I think you bring up a point that's near and dear to me, and it's so much fun to talk to these different parish leaders, be it, Belinda Constant, the mayor in Gretna, or David Carmidel down in Grand Isle, the mayor down there who can go on and on about the burrito levy back there, and and none of us knew a burrito. What is the burrito levy?
Right. And then Terrebonne Parish president, Lafourche Parish presidents who have their own unique problems there, and how those folks are trying to address them, taking it upon themselves to tax themselves for protection.
That is correct. Even the stuff over in St. John that I was talking about, many of us not understanding that, hey, we're nervous here because this levee's not built yet. And,
flooded twice since 2012. Man.
Exactly, and very expensive floods and all, and these people can paint that picture. But to your point, Errol, it's very interesting because those GOSEPs or emergency management teams and all that, they become the hub or the central, and it makes it a little bit easier for us in the media that if we're out and about, then we know we can go to these municipalities. Down in St. Bernard, they've got a really nice one on, Judge Perez Drive, which is sort of their central place where they are. In St. John, they've got theirs. In St. Charles, they've got theirs. And it becomes kind of a one-stop shop for you being able to at least get the information that you need to get to the viewers.
Yeah, well, all of us living down here, those who are the policy makers, the decision makers running the places, those who cover the places, the reporters, and all of us who live here, we all need to be prepared.
Yes.
I mean, this is really true because this is going to continue to happen to us as it's been happening, for God knows how long. But in this one, maybe we're breathing a bit of a sigh of relief. There's still those who, unfortunately, are uncomfortable in unair-conditioned homes right now and also taking care of their flooded homes or cars. But there's another one, in the books, and once again, we're showing our resiliency.
Yeah, and
we get through it.
The governor and the Louisiana delegation up in Washington is also attempting to get one of those major federal declarations done so that we can get more money to the state. That all kind of came down.
But every governor's going to want to make a federal declaration. Every president's going to want to make a federal declaration.
All right. We have
but
to.
it's the guys in the parish levels that need to make it tough.
We got to wrap up now.
I want to acknowledge, some real heroes in government, people behind the scenes, and the classic behind-the-scenes person with Lee Young, who died this past week. She was a past president of the League of Women Voters. She was active with Paul Valto and his Deputies Association. She'd been living on the Gulf Coast for the past few years. But she was very active in the community, and she died and be missed.
And thanks to her for all that she did, because she was a hard worker in this community. All right, thanks a lot, E. Mike.
LeBron mentioned it a little earlier. I think now the thing to look at is this sort of the politics in terms of getting federal money to help. Even though this wasn't a huge storm, there's still a lot of money to fix power lines and all the infrastructure damage that happened. The FEMA administrator was here and toured the area, and so that will be kind of up to our congressional delegation to see through.
All right.
You mentioned losing someone in the middle of this storm. As it's approaching, we get word that Frankie Beverly and Mays passes away. National band with a great relationship with the city of New Orleans. Right. Frankie Beverly and Mays closing out Essence for the first 15 or so years. They did a tribute to him back in July at this Essence Fest. Did Jazz Fest probably 20, 25 times. Their relationship with the city solidified with an album they did, which became one of their biggest sellers, Frankie Beverly and Mays Live at the Sanger, or Live in New Orleans, which was recorded at the Sanger Theater, probably their biggest seller. And my goodness, what a loss.
A loss.
Gave him his flowers while he was here. Yes, enjoy him for many years. Yes, indeed.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.